Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Joel, one of the Wandering Hartz, and today we're going to be tackling one of the biggest questions that we get a lot while we travel full time, which is how do we find an apartment? Specifically today we're going to be talking about finding an apartment in Danang, Vietnam. Now, if you've been following our Vietnam series, you'll have probably watched us arrive in Vietnam and then stay in a couple different apartments, or hotels rather, while we were trying to find the perfect apartment. You'll also know that we've had a bit of a struggle with that. And in our last video, we even shared basically the story of how we got scammed trying to find our first apartment. Having said all that, this is not going to be your typical guide. We're going to be brutally honest here, starting with the fact that prices have risen in Da Nang. If you've been watching YouTube videos from even just like 2 years ago or even a year ago, just know that that stuff's out of date. As far as pricing is concerned, there's been a ton of construction all over town. Prices are up, and yeah, the market's very competitive too. Also, the high season is basically probably longer than you anticipate. Often we talk about high season being in the beginning of the year, like maybe January or more like February through April or so. But we've experienced it. It goes quite a bit longer, all the way into the summer months. Now we're going to talk about a few things that are critical to your search for the perfect place, and a few things that people probably aren't going to be talking about here in other videos. We've actually lived here, we've done the apartment hunt, and we've made these mistakes so that hopefully you won't have to make them either. Let's go ahead and dive into this real deal guide so you can find your perfect place. First up, let's talk about accommodations. We're going to break down all the different types of stays that you can have here in Da Nang, starting with hotels. They're obviously a really good starting point. We definitely recommend that you book one for at least your first week, and ideally prior to your arrival. It's a perfect base for any kind of apartment hunting that you're doing. Also, another thing is you can actually pay with credit card on most of those hotels, or even use points if you're into the whole points game. There's quite a few like popular branded hotels here that you can just book with points, which is going to, of course, save you a lot of money too. Now, if you're going to be staying for longer stays of a month or even more, some hotels still can offer a good deal, which is kind of surprising. But just be aware that once you get past that like 1 month mark, some of those hotels, maybe some of the smaller ones, might start looking at making you pay for some of the utilities like electricity. Overall, we've found the best kind of hotels to look at, or the best platforms rather, to find hotels are things like Booking.com, Agoda, and even to a lesser extent, you might be able to find a few things over on Hotels.com. Next, let's talk about serviced apartments. This is probably one of the most popular choices for nomads. Serviced essentially means that you're getting like a cleaning usually at least like once a week or maybe once or twice a month. Also, utilities might be shared, or at least some of them, like internet. Also, the key to know with this is that they're typically going to be looking for minimum 3-month contracts. However, you can still find some serviced apartments who will agree to shorter terms. So, don't freak out if you're only going to be there for a month or 2 months. And that brings us to private apartments and condos. These are going to usually be in some of the more modern buildings, in the newer part where they're building up more in newer parts of town, or even some of the like small little local boutique ones. Now, the big difference here is that you're basically going to have to you're kind of on your own when you're trying to, it's like living anywhere else. You're going to have to deal with pay all your utilities. They're usually not included, and you're going to be paying sometimes a separate management fee as well. Some of those utilities might be water, internet, in addition to your monthly rent. And a good thing though is with these, a lot of times you can find a lot more amenities than you would with a regular serviced apartment, more like in lines what you can find with hotels. Next, let's talk about houses. You can absolutely find houses for rent in Da Nang. However, you're gonna have better luck looking for longer term. It's really hard to find short-term houses. Everyone's going to basically looking for like a 1-year lease on that, which of course isn't going to be ideal for shorter nomad stays. However, like I said, you can get pretty good deals still in the less touristy parts of town. Again, if you're looking for a year or longer. Also, let's talk about Airbnbs and the fact that on some of those like booking platforms like hotels.com or whatever, you can rent for upwards of a month too. And these are really great options because they're easy, they're secure, and you can book directly. However, they're generally going to be a little higher cost involved, especially when it comes to Airbnbs. Usually, all of your utilities are included, but not always, especially when you get to beyond 1 month. Same applies there. We've seen a ton of Airbnbs that have utilities charged separately as well, specifically electricity. That's the big one because people use their AC a lot. So another thing, of course, is that you can use a credit card for booking these, or at least most of them. There will still be a few that will require cash. Now, it can also be a little bit more difficult to find month-long stays on those platforms, especially like Airbnb, just because a lot of these that are available, they might look really nice, but they might only be available for like days or weeks usually. So if you're trying to find like a block of, like a 1 month block, it might be hard to find one that isn't already like booked up elsewhere. Now here's a pro tip though. If you're gonna be looking at Airbnb and you find a place that looks really nice, maybe it's in a nice apartment building that has like a lot of amenities and things like that. Look around, look at those pictures, see if you can find anything else in that same building. If you can identify what the building is, then oftentimes you can just go over to Google Maps or do a Google search and you can find the contact information for that building itself and try to contact them directly, especially or if it's through a management company, and maybe you can get a little bit better deal there, save a few bucks. Next up, let's talk about some of the neighborhoods you can stay in Danang. Basically, where you live is going to make a huge difference as to what your experience is there. Some of the main nomad spots are as follows, starting with An Thong area. Now, An Thong is actually within the My An ward, which is the bigger area there. An Thong specifically, actually all of My An at this point, it's kind of grown quite a bit. Think of it as like Western Disneyland or the Western Quarter. It's where a lot of expats are, as well as a lot of digital nomads, slow travelers, etc. It's very walkable, and it's basically the heart of that whole scene. There's tons of restaurants, tons of bars. There's even a bunch of co-works in there. Lots of really good opportunities for socializing. It's super convenient, but of course, you're going to be surrounded by a lot of other foreigners and not a lot of locals. Now, if you want something a little bit quieter, you can head over to the Santra Peninsula. That's a little bit north of this area. It's more local. The beaches are generally a little bit more peaceful, but it's also maybe just a little bit less walkable as well. Definitely recommend needing a scooter up there or relying on using the Grab app to get around. Now, if you just go across the river over to the Hai Chau district, it's basically the city center, and it sits right along the western edge of the Han River. Now, this is going to be a lot more local, but you also get a little bit more of a cosmopolitan vibe with big shopping centers over there. There's some bigger stores as well. Again, it's not very walkable, but you're going to need a scooter as well if you're going to get around there, especially if you want to get across the bridge over into go to the beach or go to like the My An area as well. Or again, use a Grab. And I will say this though, it will offer you a little bit more of an authentic experience if you're looking for that. But finally, if you're looking for a true local experience, then you might want to check out the Thon Key district. It's going to be a little bit more of an urban area, but it's also got a lot less tourism there. So it's going to be your best bet for finding a little bit more general cultural immersion if that is what you're looking for. It's got a beach, more of like a locals beach, which is a huge plus if you're looking for the immersion again. It also means you're going to be a little bit more relaxed. It's going to be cleaner, also a little quieter, and not going to have as many of those tourist-focused businesses there. Now, before you arrive in Danang, be sure to grab our quick start guide to make settling in super, super easy. You can find links in the description, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. So next, let's talk about how you actually find this perfect place for you to stay in. Basically, it means we're going to be talking about some strategies here. First thing I would suggest is starting with Facebook groups. Basically just search things like Danang apartments for rent or Danang housing. You'll also check out some of the Danang expat groups as well. The good news here is you're going to find tons of new options and they're posted every single day. The bad news is it can be a little overwhelming because you're going to see a lot of the same posts over and over again reposted. And also communication can be a bit slow when you reach out to these between landlords and as well as agents. Now, a pro tip here would be to create a post that says what you're looking for. Basically, you want to state your budget, your ideal neighborhood that you're looking at staying in, provide things like move-in dates, and also any must-have amenities that you're looking for. And then sit back and wait for the responses because you will get your inbox flooded with lots of people responding. Next, let's talk about real estate agents. Now, this kind of goes along a little bit with the Facebook groups because a lot of times you're going to find them responding in those Facebook groups. But the inside scoop on that is that when you're looking for leases under 3 months, most of the bigger established agents are probably not going to be interested in assisting you. Fact is that they get paid by commission by the landlord, and of course they're going to be pushing you towards higher commission apartments and or longer leases. Now, you will get people to respond, and in our experience, a lot of those were basically college students that were working for one of the more established agents. The problem with them is that they don't have as much experience, and they also have a lot limited liability because they're in school or they're having to study. And finally is the old tried and true just walk around and ask method. This is basically where you go around and you look for buildings that have signs that say for rent or apartments available. The way to do that is find the neighborhood that you're interested in and just walk the streets. Make note of all of the different buildings. If it's open, go in, talk to reception, see what they've got available. Pricing, all that kind of stuff, see if you can schedule a viewing. If not, which is the case that we mostly experience, is like there wasn't anybody there, then there's usually going to be a phone number, and you just call that number and then go from there. One thing though too is if you're going to be calling, make sure you already have a SIM card. We definitely recommend getting a local SIM card in Vietnam. They're super cheap, and makes it a lot easier to do things like this. We've got a whole video you can check out where we kind of talk the whole process of getting a local SIM card. Of course, the biggest problem of this method is the fact it can be very, very time consuming, and it can also be absolutely miserable in the heat of the spring and the summer months when it's 90 degrees and 87% humidity. You really don't want to be walking around looking for apartments. It can get really, really annoying pretty quick. Also, a lot of the signs that you're going to see aren't going to reflect whether or not there's currently of any vacancy. Next up is the viewing. This is basically your inspection checklist, and it's also the most important part. You must see the place in person. Photos and videos are often really old, maybe even from when they first put the thing on the market like 2 or 3 years ago, and they don't reflect the current state of the apartment. When you're there, you need to become like a detective. Put on your detective hat or whatever, and like really start looking and asking a ton of questions. First, and I cannot stress this enough, noise. The Nang is very loud, especially in your more popular touristy areas like the An Thong or My An area. If possible, visit during the daytime, looking for construction, looking for any kind of restaurants and beer gardens, anything that might be open in the evening. And then you also want to go back at night and check again. See which ones of those are actually open, see if the construction is still going on, see if there's anything else going on too. And especially on the weekends, because that's where we found that the most noise is. You're basically looking like Thursday night through Sunday is like probably the busiest, loudest time in the city. A few of the things you want to be looking for are things like, is there a karaoke bar nearby? Yes. Is there a loud beer garden across the street or maybe even around the corner? Is the building itself really noisy? For instance, if it may be a tall apartment building, it's got like really echoey hallways and not a lot of insulation. You're also going to be looking for things like, Is it on an intersection where there's going to be a lot of honking going on? Or even where you're hearing the bun bao guy constantly doing his route all night long. This is not foolproof, so some of these may be really difficult to check, but ultimately it is going to really affect your experience there, and it can ruin your stay if you don't pay attention to it. Next up, when viewing apartments, you're checking for some of the realities of just living in a tropical location. That's things like mold, termites, bugs, stuff like that. Definitely open up the cabinets, look for signs of insect activity, check the window frames, make sure that there's like no big cracks or anything in there. So another thing to think about too is that our cleanliness standards in the West are going to be a lot higher than what you're going to find in Vietnam. We've experienced this. We've actually watched them clean, and yeah, literally our next video, you'll see some stuff about that. But anyways, things like this, doors, they might not close. The maintenance is not the best in some places. Handles might either be loose or not even be on the door, which is also something we experienced. Is the bed like hard as a rock? Is there ventilation at all, either in the room or more specifically in the bathroom? Is it a wet room? There's a lot of things like that you want to check out. And finally, be sure to turn everything on, all of the appliances, whether that be the AC specifically, because you're going to want your AC working, hot water, the stove, like log into the Wi-Fi while you're there on your phone, check the speed, make sure it's up to the standards that you need. Also, just make sure everything is working properly before you sign any contract. Next, let's talk about signing the contract and deposit, what to expect. So you've found a place that you love it. Now let's talk about the money part. For a budget, we definitely recommend spending at least 10 million dong. And that would be for like a 1-bedroom in the more popular area like An Thong, the Mai An area. Now, if you want more options and less competition in that same area, you might want to up your budget a bit and expect to spend between 15 and 20 million dong. Probably going to be a little bit more ideal. Definitely going to open up a lot more options for you. And if you want to still save money, you can. It's just that you're going to be looking at some of those other areas that we discussed earlier. Now, as an example, your 10 million to 20 million is going to be between like 400 and about 800 US. Also, don't be afraid to negotiate. You can ask for discounts. This is expected. It's culturally normal. However, your results may vary. I wouldn't expect a whole lot of discount, unless, of course, you're planning to sign a much longer lease. Otherwise, there's not really a whole lot of incentive for them to give you much of a deal. Now, with that contract, like we said before, most landlords are looking for at least a 3-month contract. Now, if you sign a 3-month lease, but you have to leave after, say, just 2 months, don't be expecting to get that deposit back at all. You're just gonna have to write that off as a loss, or you're gonna have to find someone who will be willing to do a smaller lease. Now, typically when you do pay a deposit, it's gonna be about 1 month's rent. It's also common to pay for part of your stay in advance as well. As an example, for a 3-month contract, they might be asking for 2 months rent plus a 1-month deposit. All that's going to be up front, and most likely it's going to be in cash. However, you can also use a wire transfer, like using the Wise app, which is what we've been doing. We've got a link in the description if you want to check that out. So we definitely recommend that when you go to sign the contract, you bring plenty of cash, and also have a wire transfer app like Wise or whatever already set up on your phone ahead of time. And here's probably the most critical tip for your departure from Vietnam itself. Like if Da Nang is your final destination there, your deposit will be returned in cash. So even if you paid by a wire transfer, they're just going to give it to you in cash, because they're not going to want to pay the couple dollars or $9 or whatever it is for the transfer fee. So you definitely want to plan accordingly, because you're going to have a whole lot of cash. That's a lot of dong to be carrying around, and you're not going to get the best rate at the airport there in Da Nang. So depending on where you're going next, hopefully you can find a place to exchange it. Now, speaking of cash, The majority of the ATMs in Danang are only going to let you take out about 3 million dong, or about $120 a day. So you're going to want to plan on hitting the ATM basically once you arrive, if you're going to be doing the whole like stay in a hotel and searching for a longer term stay, because it's going to take you a couple days to pull enough money out so you can get that deposit and rent ahead of time. Now, we definitely recommend bringing at least 2 ATM cards from 2 separate banks. That way you can kind of speed up that process. Plus, it's always a good idea to have a backup no matter where you're traveling, especially when you're traveling full time. So next up, let's talk about high season, and then I'm going to leave you with a few final tips. If you're searching during high season, you're going to need to be ready. Competition is fierce, especially in the An Thong or My An area, in the most popular area. Good apartments can be gone in just a day or two. If a place has been on the market for over a week, there's probably a reason why. It's probably really loud in the area, or there's some kind of a maintenance issue, or it's just plain overpriced. Now, when you do go to a viewing, you gotta need to be in the headspace already that you might have to just go ahead and make the decision right there on the spot whether you want to take it, especially in the high season. If you wait, it will be gone. And I know this sounds contradictory to what I said earlier, but that's just the brutal reality of it. You might not have an opportunity to come back later at night or whatever to see it. And that's the case, then I definitely recommend, while you're waiting to look at these other apartments, walk those neighborhoods, and so you're already paying attention so that when you do go to these viewings, you probably already have a little better idea of what to expect. So that was a whole lot, but I think after watching this, you're totally prepared for this, right? All right, so to summarize, basically book a hotel for your first week, be ready for a very competitive market, and make sure you've got a budget of at least 10 to 15 million dong. The lower your budget, the more difficult it's going to be to find an ideal place. Also, be sure to inspect for noise and other issues in person. And finally, understand that the 3-month contract is pretty standard, and remember that you will have to get your deposit back in cash. Again, finding a place in Danang can be a pretty big hassle, and that's just the way it is. But ultimately, it's worth it because Danang is a really, really cool city, and we've really enjoyed hanging out there. In our next video, we're going to show you what it's like for us to settle into a new place as full-time travelers. And specifically this, we're going to be using our time here in Danang as an example. Now, if this guide was helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to the channel as well as our newsletter. There's lots of good tips and things there. And please be sure to share your own Danang rental tips or any questions you have in the comments. That's it, guys. Thanks for watching and happy wandering.